The roar of artillery split the fog-choked morning at Kemmel Hill in 1916. Shells screamed overhead, invisible death raining from positions no one could see. British gunners fired blindly into the mist, wasting thousands of rounds on empty fields, while German batteries, hidden behind ridges and smoke, continued their murderous work uninterrupted. In a cramped dugout near the front lines, a young physicist named William Sansom Tucker lay awake, listening to the chaos. He noticed something peculiar. 2 mouse holes near his bed created a faint draft whenever the pressure wave from a distant gun passed through. The rum jar on his shelf vibrated differently when shells flew overhead compared to when the guns themselves fired. While seasoned officers dismissed his observations as academic nonsense, Tucker began to understand what everyone else had missed. Sound traveled in waves, and those waves carried information. Information that could reveal the exact position of every hidden enemy gun. If you find stories like this fascinating, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. The problem of counter-battery fire had plagued military commanders since the introduction of indirect artillery. When guns fired from behind hills or through thick smoke screens, traditional methods of locating them became useless. Flash spotting required clear line of sight. Aircraft reconnaissance depended on favorable weather, and simply firing back at the general direction of the enemy wasted ammunition while accomplishing nothing. The British Expeditionary Force was hemorrhaging men and materiel to an enemy they could not see, let alone hit. Lawrence Bragg, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who had enlisted after his brother Robert was killed in action, led a small team tasked with solving this impossible problem. The concept was simple enough. Sound travels at a known speed. If multiple microphones could detect the boom of an enemy gun, the time differences between those detections could be used to triangulate the position. But implementation proved nightmarish. Early attempts failed spectacularly. The microphones available in 1915 could not distinguish between the low-frequency boom of a gun firing and the higher-frequency crack of its shell passing overhead. The sonic boom of the projectile arrived first, throwing off every calculation. Wind noise overwhelmed the sensitive equipment, and the sheer volume of combat, with hundreds of guns firing simultaneously, created an acoustic chaos that no instrument could decipher. Tucker, a corporal from the physics department at London University, attacked the problem with methodical brilliance. He understood that the gun's firing signature existed in a different frequency range than the shell's sonic boom. What he needed was a microphone that could hear only the low frequencies, filtering out everything else. His solution came from an unexpected place. A thin platinum wire, heated by electrical current, would cool slightly when disturbed by a pressure wave. That cooling changed the wire's electrical resistance, creating a measurable signal. But the key innovation was the container. Tucker discovered that wooden ammunition boxes, when fitted with a small aperture over which the heated wire was stretched, acted as Helmholtz resonators. They amplified only the low frequencies associated with gun firing, while ignoring the high-pitched crack of passing shells. The first tests of Tucker's hot wire microphone exceeded all expectations. Where previous systems had produced nothing but noise, Tucker's device clearly identified individual gun reports. The low-frequency boom of a field gun created a distinct signature. A howitzer produced another pattern entirely. And most importantly, the direction and distance to each weapon could now be calculated with unprecedented accuracy. By September 1916, every British sound ranging section in Belgium and France had been equipped with Tucker's microphones. Arrays of 6 to 8 devices were positioned in shallow curves along the front lines, connected by field cables to a central recording station. When enemy guns fired, the pressure waves reached each microphone at slightly different times. These time differences, recorded on continuously running film, allowed mathematicians to calculate the exact coordinates of the firing position. The system required extraordinary precision. Sound travels at roughly 340 meters per second, but that speed varies with temperature, humidity, and wind. Tucker developed correction tables that allowed operators to adjust for meteorological conditions. A sudden gust could cool the platinum wire, creating false signals, so the microphones were wrapped in layers of camouflage netting that dampened wind interference while allowing the pressure waves through. Advanced observation posts were positioned ahead of the microphone arrays. These forward listeners watched for muzzle flashes and operated a remote switch that activated the recording equipment. A device called the flash board synchronized observations from multiple posts, ensuring that all operators were tracking the same target before the expensive film began rolling. The Germans initially had no idea what was happening. Their well-concealed batteries, which had operated with impunity for months, suddenly began receiving accurate counter-battery fire. Guns hidden behind ridges, invisible to aircraft and ground observers, were being destroyed. Officers reported an almost supernatural ability of British artillery to find targets through fog, smoke, and darkness. German intelligence eventually deduced that the British were using some form of acoustic detection. They attempted countermeasures, setting off false flashes that produced no sound, hoping to confuse the system. But Tucker's microphones cared nothing for light. They listened only for the telltale pressure wave of an actual firing. The deception failed. The Battle of Cambrai in November 1917 demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of sound ranging. British forces achieved complete surprise, their artillery having pre-registered targets located entirely by acoustic means. German batteries that had dominated the sector for months were silenced within hours of the attack beginning. The breakthrough, though ultimately contained, proved that hidden artillery was no longer safe from counter-fire. But it was at Amiens in August 1918 that sound ranging achieved its greatest triumph. The assault, later described by German General Erich Ludendorff as the Black Day of the German Army, relied heavily on Tucker's invention. British guns did not fire a single registration round before the attack. Instead, every target had been located through sound ranging and flash spotting during the preceding weeks. When the bombardment began, it fell with surgical precision on positions the Germans believed were unknown to the enemy. The technique Tucker pioneered could locate enemy artillery to within 25 to 50 meters under normal circumstances. Later refinements allowed operators to estimate the caliber of the gun from its acoustic signature and even determine the direction of fire, eliminating the need for visual confirmation entirely. An enemy that could not be seen could still be heard, and anything that could be heard could be destroyed. If you are finding this journey through military innovation compelling, this is a perfect moment to hit that subscribe button. More stories of forgotten genius await. The implications extended far beyond counter-battery fire. Tucker recognized that any object producing sound could be located using similar principles. In 1938, he became director of acoustical research for the Royal Air Force. His group constructed massive concrete parabolic mirrors along England's southern coast, designed to focus the sound of approaching aircraft engines onto sensitive microphones. These acoustic mirrors, some reaching heights of over 6 meters, could detect aircraft at distances of up to 20 miles under optimal conditions. They represented the cutting edge of air defense technology in the years before radar matured. Tucker's sound mirrors provided early warning of German aircraft during exercises, proving that the principles he had developed in the trenches of the Western Front could be adapted to entirely new threats. The mirrors had limitations. Aircraft were becoming faster, reducing the warning time acoustic detection could provide, and sound was affected by atmospheric conditions in ways that were difficult to predict. A temperature inversion could create acoustic shadows where no detection was possible. High winds rendered the systems temporarily useless. Alan Blumlein, the inventor of stereophonic sound, developed an enhancement that converted audio signals into visual representations on a cathode ray tube screen. This eliminated the need for trained listeners to interpret what they heard. Operators could now see the direction and intensity of incoming sound, making the system faster and more reliable. Under ideal conditions, detection ranges approached 30 kilometers, but radar was coming. Robert Watson Watt's electromagnetic detection system, which could track aircraft at 60 miles regardless of weather conditions, made acoustic location obsolete for air defense. By the time the Battle of Britain began in 1940, the sound mirrors had been relegated to backup status. They remained operational, a fail-safe in case the radar stations were destroyed, but they would never again represent the primary line of defense. Sound ranging against ground targets, however, continued to prove invaluable. During the Second World War, every major combatant employed some variant of Tucker's system. British Corps-level artillery survey regiments maintained sound-ranging sections throughout the conflict. German forces used dedicated units called Beobachtungsabteilungen for the same purpose. The technology had become so mature that it was standard practice rather than experimental innovation. The challenge of locating mortars proved particularly suited to acoustic detection. Mortars fired at high angles, making their shells difficult for radar to track accurately. But the distinctive thump of a mortar firing created an easily identifiable acoustic signature. Sound-ranging sections specialized in counter-mortar operations, locating and destroying weapons that had previously terrorized infantry with impunity. Smoke screens had become ubiquitous on the battlefield. Tanks carried smoke grenades that could be deployed in seconds, creating dense clouds that blocked visual observation and disrupted laser rangefinders. Infantry used smoke to cover advances and withdrawals. Artillery fired smoke rounds to blind enemy observers. The modern battlefield was often shrouded in artificial obscurant. Against these conditions, optical systems struggled. A tank commander peering through smoke could see nothing. A gunner attempting to engage targets through a dense screen had to rely on prior knowledge of enemy positions and considerable luck. But sound ranging remained unaffected. Smoke blocked light. It did not block sound. The Red Army demonstrated the scale possible with smoke operations during the crossing of the Dnieper River in October 1943. A smoke screen 30 kilometers long concealed Soviet forces from German observation. At the Anzio beachhead in 1944, American Chemical Corps troops maintained a 25-kilometer light haze around the harbor for 2 months, preventing German forward observers in the surrounding hills from directing accurate fire. These massive screens created a curious tactical situation. Both sides could deploy smoke to blind their opponents, but only forces equipped with acoustic detection systems could continue to engage targets through the obscurant. Sound ranging, the technology that had been dismissed as impractical 30 years earlier, provided a decisive advantage when visibility dropped to zero. The physics remained exactly as Tucker had described. A gun or tank engine produces sound waves that propagate outward at predictable speeds. Multiple sensors detecting those waves at slightly different times allow triangulation of the source. The mathematics had not changed since 1916. What had changed was the sophistication of the equipment and the training of the operators. German forces had developed their own approach to operating without visual contact. The Panther tank, in its late war variants, could be equipped with the Sperber infrared system. A 300-millimeter infrared searchlight mounted on the commander's cupola projected invisible light that could be detected by a Bildwandler image converter. The commander could see targets that were completely invisible to the naked eye. But infrared had its own limitations. Modern smoke grenades were specifically designed to block both visible and infrared wavelengths. The particles suspended in the smoke absorbed and scattered infrared radiation just as effectively as visible light. A dense smokescreen defeated infrared just as thoroughly as it defeated optical observation. Thermal imaging systems, which detected the heat emitted by targets rather than reflected light, offered some improvement, but even these could be countered. Aerosols of burning phosphorus particles were effective against thermal imagers, though the effect was short-lived. Water fog sprayed around a vehicle absorbed infrared radiation and additionally served as a countermeasure against certain radar frequencies. The fundamental advantage of acoustic detection was that it operated on entirely different physical principles. Electromagnetic radiation could be blocked by appropriately engineered particles. Sound waves, being mechanical vibrations of air molecules, penetrated smoke, fog, and obscurant with minimal attenuation. A target producing noise was a target that could be located and engaged. Tucker's original hot wire microphone had evolved considerably by the 1940s. Improvements in electronics allowed for more sensitive detection and faster processing. The film recording systems of the First World War gave way to electronic galvanometers and eventually to cathode ray displays. But the core concept remained unchanged. Listen for the enemy, calculate their position, direct fire accordingly. The British led the way in developing more sophisticated systems. Multiplexing technology introduced at the end of the Second World War allowed multiple microphones to share a common field cable, reducing the logistical burden of deploying sound-ranging arrays. Radar was found to be effective for locating mortars, complementing rather than replacing acoustic detection for counter-mortar work. In the decades after the war, VHF radio-linked sound ranging replaced the traditional hardwired microphone bases. Arrays of microphone clusters, each comprising 3 microphones a few meters apart, along with meteorological sensors, could be deployed rapidly across a wide area. These unmanned clusters listened continuously, calculated bearings to detected sound sources, and transmitted the data to processing stations. The military calls these modern systems acoustic multi-mission sensors. Mounted on vehicles or deployed as fixed installations, they provide continuous surveillance of the acoustic environment. When a weapon fires, the system detects it, calculates its position, and can provide targeting data within seconds. The time from shot to countershot has compressed from minutes to moments. William Tucker could not have imagined the sophistication of these descendants of his rum jar microphone, but he would have recognized the principle instantly. Sound carries information. That information can reveal what sight cannot perceive, and in warfare, knowing what the enemy cannot see provides an advantage that technology has never been able to eliminate. The skeptics who laughed at Tucker's Echo Rangefinder, as some derisively called his invention, fell silent at Cambrai. They fell silent at Amiens. They fell silent every time hidden guns were destroyed by fire directed at positions no one could see. The technology that emerged from mouse holes and rum jars in a Belgian farmhouse changed the nature of artillery warfare forever. Take a moment now to leave a comment about which aspect of this story you found most surprising. Your engagement helps bring more forgotten military innovations to light. Tucker's career after the First World War demonstrated the broader applications of acoustic detection. His work with sound mirrors for air defense proved that the principles could be adapted to entirely different target sets. His research into how sound propagated through the atmosphere contributed to meteorological science as well as military technology. He had started as a physics student conscripted into an unwinnable war and emerged as one of the founders of modern acoustic surveillance. Lawrence Bragg, the Nobel laureate who had led the sound-ranging development effort, continued to consult for the military during the Second World War. His expertise in sonar complemented the ground-based acoustic systems that Tucker had pioneered. The two men represented a generation of scientists who had turned their theoretical knowledge to practical military problems with devastating effectiveness. The legacy of their work extends to the present day. Every modern military maintains some capability for acoustic detection and location. Counter-battery radar is paired with sound-ranging arrays to provide redundant coverage. Counter-mortar systems rely heavily on acoustic sensors because the trajectory of mortar rounds is difficult for radar to track accurately. Smoke and obscurant remain standard battlefield tools. Tanks still carry smoke grenades. Artillery still fires smoke rounds. Chemical units still deploy large area screens to conceal movements and confuse enemy observation. But defenders equipped with acoustic sensors can locate and engage targets through even the densest artificial obscurant. The advantage shifts to whoever can perceive the enemy without relying on sight alone. The story of Tucker and his Echo rangefinder illustrates a pattern that appears repeatedly in military history. Unconventional thinkers, often dismissed by established authority, develop solutions to problems that conventional approaches cannot solve. Tucker was a corporal, not a general. He was a physicist, not a professional soldier. His ideas came from observation and experiment rather than doctrine and tradition. The military establishment initially resisted his innovations. Sound ranging seemed impractical, unreliable, too dependent on conditions that could not be controlled. The technology required educated operators who could understand the physics behind the measurements. It demanded precision manufacturing for the microphones and recording equipment. It was expensive, complicated, and unproven. But Tucker persisted. He refined his designs. He trained operators. He demonstrated results that could not be ignored. When his microphones began locating guns that had tormented British forces for months, the skepticism evaporated. Within a year of his first successful test, every British sound-ranging section in France and Belgium had been equipped with his invention. The guns that fell silent to Tucker's Echo rangefinder were operated by men who believed themselves invisible. They had positioned their batteries behind ridges in forests shrouded by fog and smoke. Every principle of concealment known to military science had been applied to hide them from enemy observation. And yet they died, killed by fire directed from positions that could not possibly have seen them. Modern warfare has only intensified this dynamic. Stealth technology attempts to hide aircraft and ships from radar detection. Signature reduction seeks to minimize the thermal, acoustic, and electromagnetic emissions of military systems. But sensors continue to evolve, finding new ways to detect targets that believe themselves hidden. Acoustic detection represents one of the oldest and most reliable methods of finding concealed targets. It predates radar by decades. It functions in conditions that defeat optical and infrared systems. It cannot be jammed in the conventional sense because it does not rely on electromagnetic radiation. A silent battlefield would defeat acoustic sensors, but a silent battlefield is an impossibility in modern warfare. The tanks that Tucker's spiritual descendants target through smokescreens today are far more sophisticated than the armored vehicles of the Second World War. They carry their own suites of sensors and countermeasures. Their crews are trained in tactical concealment and the use of terrain. But they still produce sound when they move and fire. And that sound, however faint, can be detected, analyzed, and used to direct lethal fire. Tucker's insight in that Belgian dugout, listening to pressure waves disturb the air flowing through mouse holes, led directly to capabilities that remain relevant more than a century later. The rum jar microphone evolved into multi-mission acoustic sensors. The film recording apparatus became digital signal processors. The manual calculations performed by mathematicians gave way to automated algorithms that triangulate positions in milliseconds. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Sound cannot be hidden the way light can be blocked. A weapon that fires produces an acoustic signature. That signature propagates through air, penetrates smoke and fog, and reaches sensors that can determine its origin. Tucker's Echo rangefinder, for all the mockery it initially received, represented a revolutionary insight into the nature of concealment and detection. The officers who laughed at the young corporal's experiments stopped laughing when their own artillery began destroying targets they themselves could not see. They stopped laughing when German positions that had seemed impregnable fell to precisely directed fire. They stopped laughing when they realized that Tucker had given them the ability to strike through smoke, through fog, through the darkness itself. Military innovation often comes from unexpected sources. Tucker was not trained for the problem he solved. He approached it with the curiosity of a physicist rather than the assumptions of a professional artillerist. He asked questions that others had not thought to ask. He noticed phenomena that others had dismissed as irrelevant. And from those observations, he built a system that changed the balance of power on the Western Front. The Echo Rangefinder story reminds us that technological superiority is never permanent. The Germans had excellent artillery and skilled gunners. They had sophisticated concealment techniques and well-prepared positions. But they had no answer to acoustic detection. Their invisibility, which had protected them for years, was stripped away in months. Today's military forces invest billions in stealth, camouflage, and signature reduction. These investments provide real advantages, but they also create a false sense of security. Every method of concealment has a corresponding method of detection. The radar-absorbing materials that hide aircraft from electromagnetic sensors do nothing against acoustic detection. The infrared blocking smoke that defeats thermal imagers does not affect microphones. Tucker understood this principle intuitively. He knew that the physical world offered multiple channels of information about targets. Blocking one channel did not eliminate all the others. His genius lay in exploiting a channel that others had overlooked, turning the inevitable noise of warfare into a targeting solution. The thick smoke that once seemed to offer perfect concealment proved to be no obstacle at all. Sound passed through it unchanged, and behind that sound, Tucker's microphones listened, calculated, and guided fire onto targets that believed themselves safe. The laugh was ultimately on those who had dismissed the eccentric physicist and his rum jar invention. This is the enduring lesson of Tucker's Echo Rangefinder. Concealment is temporary. Detection is inevitable. The only question is which side develops the means of perception first. In 1916, Tucker gave the British that advantage. The enemy guns fell silent, and warfare was never quite the same again.